So this graph is for people aged over 16. And it was a slow start, but it picked up rapidly over December and into January. So that was when Omicron cases were spiking. But now that growth has slowed considerably. So let's compare the take-up with the number of people vaccinated. As you can see, there's a very small number of people who've had one dose, so that's the yellow bit at the top of this graph, but have not had the second. But then there's a pretty big gap between the number of people who've had 2 doses, which is the orange portion, and the number who've had 3, which is the blue. So almost 95% of the population over 16, about 19.5 million people have had 2 doses. But just 12.3 million people have had their 3rd shot. So it leaves around 7 million people who are eligible for a 3rd dose, but haven't had it yet. Now, Trent Twomey is the president of the National Pharmacy Guild, and he joins us now from Cairns in far north Queensland. Trent, g'day. So pharmacists are on the front line of this. From speaking to your members and your experience yourself, what has demand for the booster shots been like?
Well, demand has really slowed, and there are 3 essential elements to ensure that we have a good vaccination program in Australia. One is access points, and we have plenty of access points. There's at least 3,500 community pharmacies nationwide, and that's on top of our great general practice network and some state and territory hubs. We need to have supply, and though supply issues tended to run a bit of interference 12 months ago. Right now, we have an abundance of supply. But the third most important thing is, of course, motivation. And motivation is what we're seeing that is flatlining and stalling at the moment, which is why there's that gap between the high 95%, just shy of 95% of Australians that have had double dose vaccinations, and around 65% of us that have had our first booster.
So do you have any ideas on how this booster take-up rate can be lifted?
So listen, I think we need to take a step back and compare how we're going internationally. And our booster rate program is going exceptionally well by international standards. We're higher than the United Kingdom, we're higher than Canada, and we're higher than the United States. And to be saying that now in mid-March 2022, when we were standing here just 12 months ago in March 2021, and we were almost dead set last in the OECD for first dose vaccinations, I think is a remarkable effort. So whilst I'm happy to be critical of state and territory and Commonwealth authorities when that is necessary, I think, to be honest, we have done a pretty good job.
Yeah, but this isn't a matter of being critical. I'm just saying, what have you got any ideas on how our people can be encouraged to step up for their boosters? Like, do you think there should be another advertising campaign or something like that?
Yeah, sure. So I think language is important. I know when I'm in my pharmacies and my members are in their pharmacies, people want to know what the future of the vaccination program is. A few of our patients feel like, they're a bit of a pincushion, right? We've had our first dose, our second dose. We've had our first booster. Are we going to need a second booster? And so does this mean every 12 weeks we're going to have to roll up our sleeve to do the right thing and get a vaccine? And simply that's not the case. So I think what is important to address is the messaging out of the Australian Technical Advisory Group on immunisations. And I think the best place to do this is when we launch the National Immunisation Program for this year. So each year, Joe, the Commonwealth releases the calendar year schedule. So we should be receiving in the coming months, right, the 2022 National Immunisation Program. We've got the 21 schedule. And what we'd like to see is the language around the coronavirus vaccine very similar to the language around the annual influenza vaccine. And many of your viewers will be very comfortable with going and asking their pharmacist or asking their local GP for their annual influenza vaccine. And that's really how we need to start talking about the coronavirus vaccination program. Not first shots, not second shots, not booster shots. What do I need to do to get, whether it be my annual shot or whether it be my winter shot, my summer shot, but what do I need to do to be able to keep my immunity high, to protect myself and those around me?
And so, Trent, if there are people out there watching now, they've had their 2 shots, but they're sitting on the fence about the booster, what's your message to them?
So my message is, and this is in different states and territories, we're seeing really high vaccination rates in places like Western Australia and the ACT and Victoria. But where I am in Queensland and the Northern Territory, we're seeing a lot lower rates. So my message is very simple. Ask your pharmacist ask your GP. Make sure that you keep all of your immunisations up to date, whether that be for whooping cough, right? Whether that be for meningococcal, whether that be for flu. Now we just need to look at coronavirus as something that we need to keep ourselves up to date, and have a chat to your local healthcare professional about how to keep your immunisation for coronavirus up to date, just like the rest of them.
And if I was one of your clients coming in for that chat now, what would you say to me to encourage me to get that booster shot?
So what I'd say to you is that, you're not going to have to get a shot every 12 weeks. That was last year, right? That's not going to be this year. That's not going to be next year. But what you will have to do is you'll have to get one probably at least annually. And what we know is that the coronavirus vaccine, just like the flu shot, we'll all have to roll up our sleeves and get at least one a year. Now, that could be, depending on the way the virus mutates, that could be twice a year. But, we're not going to say that yet. We're not going to jump to conclusions. But if you're hesitant, please make sure that, as we approach the cooler months, as we approach peak influenza season, just make sure that you're protected and your family's protected.
What about people who might know other people who've had the virus and didn't get that sick from it and they think they don't need to get it?
So my wife and I, we've got two kids, right? So we've got a nearly 9-year-old and a 10-year-old. And so there are 4 of us. We all got coronavirus at exactly the same time. 2 of us had slightly worse symptoms than the other 2. The other 2 were completely asymptomatic. But you know what? It's about protecting my household. And I don't protect my household by just guessing which ones of us are going to get severe symptoms and which one of us are going to get mild symptoms. The only way we can protect my whole household from coronavirus or influenza virus is to make sure we all get our annual shot. And so that's the message.
And Trent, when we spoke to you earlier with the rollout of the booster shots, you're a bit frustrated with the support that pharmacists were getting as part of this program. What's your assessment of the support that pharmacists are getting now?
Mate, because demand has tapered off, right? The bespoke systems that have been set up for delivery of not just the vaccine, that cold stock, right, or delivery of the sharps and the sharps disposal is being able to cope. What we see pressure is when we get high demand, which we're going to get as we get into the influenza season, and those systems will not be able to cope. So what we're working diligently with the government on is making sure that those systems that were stood up quickly during the pandemic are wound down, are decommissioned, and we treat the distribution of everything to do with the coronavirus vaccine just like we do with the treatment of the rest of the vaccines in Australia, and we can get them within 24 hours notice for any pharmacy in Australia to make sure that we can meet that demand. So it's about decommissioning bespoke systems and transitioning to normal pharmaceutical supply mechanisms, which hasn't happened yet, Joe, but we're in the process of it, and hopefully it happens by the end of this calendar year.
Okay, Trent Twomey, good to have a chat to you. Yeah, we're just having a chat to our weather presenter. It was, you've had a heap of rain there in Cairns in the last 24 hours, huh?
We had, so my rain gauge at home, we had 120 mils between 2 a.m. and about 6:30, 7 o'clock this morning.
Wow.
So I'm fortunate that I live on a hill, but mate, all my gutters were overflowing. My wife and I are out there trying to sweep out the bottom floor. So it's one of those things about living up here in paradise, yep. Right? So
at least it'll look pretty lush. Okay, thanks for having a chat to us, Trent Twomey there in Cairns.
Thanks.